Raleigh, your research as a social scientist, as an academic, has brought so many gifts forward to the arena of youth ministry. But I know folks who know your work probably know that one of your seminal contributions was the Exemplary Youth Ministry study that you led with others for the Lilly Endowment. And the hallmark of that study was not going after the critiques or the shortcomings, but looking out for and finding those congregations who had high aspirations and, not without some stumbles along the way, had found correlates of successful life-giving youth ministry. Can you tell us something about what the heart of that was and what our principal takeaways from your study should be?
Well, you've, first of all, stated the seminal concept of the study. And that is, rather than working off problems and seeking to problem solve, what if one went hunting for places where the people of God on the ground are doing good things that, in fact, are having long-lasting impact on the life of young people? So what we did with the study was to pick up first with 7 denominations. Rather than take a narrow band of faith, we wanted to work with a variety of theological commitments, a variety of pieties. So we had a sense of where is God at work in particularly able ways with young men and women these days. And we discovered that God was. Finally, out of our process of beginning with nearly 500 congregations, we actually studied 131 using a survey, and then after doing some analysis of the survey, we did visits, site visits with 21, 3 in each of those 7 denominations, and further were able to pick up the stories of what was happening in those congregations. And what we, in fact, discovered was a dynamic interaction of risk, failure, new ideas, new possibilities, and a palpable sense of the presence of a living, active, transformative God at work among them. And I would say that among the primary learning that came out of this was that youth ministry, rather than so often being seen as getting the techne right, was in fact in these cases grounded in a deep theological impulse. These places spoke about God as live, here, now, present, as active. The verbs that they used in their description of God were active verbs, and they were present tense. And they saw themselves as individuals and as communities being caught up in God's presence in the world and God at work through them in the world. And so there was a transformative excitement about being a part of this big thing or this larger thing that God was doing, and seeing themselves having an identity in God's, if you will, work that God was doing in the world. What we also discovered among those assets is that congregations expressed that understanding of God's work in patterns and practices, such as practices of prayer, practices of studying Scripture, practices of discipleship and worship. We discovered that these congregations had values in which they cared about young people, not just in word, but in action, persons giving of their time and energy to be involved in the lives of young people, money. They had budgets in which they supported young people in strong and powerful ways. We also discovered that they were places who were on the outlook or lookout for particular gifted persons who had capacity to hang out with kids. And sometimes these people are seen as being somewhat odd persons, not your typical Christian. Like in one, Tiny, who was a man of about 350 pounds who ran an auto wrecking yard, was in fact a major youth leader who had put together a Motorhead group who in fact were building a racer. And a whole group of kids gathered around Tiny. And not only did we discover that Tiny's life and faith had spoken about Christianity to a group of guys who, and there was a young woman in the group as well, who never would have thought about faith as being a significant part of their life, were now in fact deeply engaged in the life of faith. And Tiny himself dramatically changed in terms of his connection with the congregation. He said to me, you know, they're now getting about $5,000 out of me a year, and before I was getting by on $5, which is just an indication of a bit of how the transformation took place in that process. So yeah, the study led us into surprises. That at its heart, youth ministry is theological. Who is God and what is God up to? And asking the question, where is God at work now and how is God at work in us, through us? It's ecclesiological. What's our understanding of the church and how young people and the church work at life together? And what's our understanding of mission as we are drawn by this active God and this life together to turn and face the world? So that so much of the life of these communities in these 7 very different faith tribes were now essentially lived on the boundaries of witness and care and service in the life of the world.